Hmm.
Good evening. Welcome. It's the After Hours show. It's Dia de los Muertos. Good evening, Anne.
Hey there, Joe.
Hey, I'm with Anne
Day of the
Lee.
Dead.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
No, Day of the Dead.
Yes, it is. I'm with Anne Lee, a retired college professor and community member at the Daily Coast. She's a member of the National Council of Independent Scholars and is a contributor to the book, The Political Economy of Art, Making the Nation of Culture. Did I get that right?
Yeah,
I believe so.
that
How
looks like a
things?
big squash there.
That is indeed hearty squash. It's the Day of the Dead. And I thought in memory of Cameron, one of our community members we lost this year, I'd commemorate the day by making a traditional Mexican dessert, candied pumpkin, basically, or uh, calabaza and tocha, which by chance, I'm here in Turkey, is one of the most traditional Turkish desserts called kabak tatslu. Tatslu. There we go. Kabak tatslu. So a very tough one. It's two vowels in there that I have very new to me. Uh, Pumpkin dessert tonight. So it's basically winter squash braised in simple syrup. We're going to be adding some cloves and cinnamon and
Yum.
orange rind.
Very autumn.
Yes. So the difference between the two dishes on the different sides of the ocean are that in Mexico they're using unrefined sugarcane, and here they typically use the refined sugarcane. So what I thought I would do is use a bastard mix of the two. So, oh, well, to be honest, I couldn't find completely raw sugar cane. So what I've got is essentially turbinado sugar, which is white sugar that's had the molasses removed from it and then added back in.
Mm.
And in Turkey, they tend to serve it with a type of clotted cream and or tahini. So I have tahini sauce there, drizzled
Nice.
with tahini and ground walnuts typically. But I thought I'd use a little flair. I'm way into the pistachios since coming to Turkey, so I'm going to be using pistachios, which will go nicely with the bright green, will go nice with the orange of the squash. So that's our plan this evening.
Yum.
Hopefully I'll get it done in time. One of the techniques I'll use is to leave the skin. What do you call that? The
Rind?
the rind of the squash. We'll leave that intact since we're going to be cooking it to a point where it's kind of melt in your mouth. But if you do not leave the rind on, it'll just fall. It has a tendency to disintegrate. So
Excellent.
if you cook it long enough, it should be edible, but maybe not tonight. I might not get it that long. We'll see. We'll
Maybe it's
experiment.
leftovers.
Yeah. So I'll leave you to catching us up on the week's news.
Oh, it's a busy week. Yes, it's election week in America. Election's coming up on Tuesday. We have 4 days left, and stuff's happening. We were discussing here earlier the revelation that there are multiple tapes and images from a cache taken from Jeffrey Epstein's vault, and that have actual images of Donald Trump with teenage girls topless. And perhaps even, this is the Daily Beast article, those you really want to look it up, there actually is an article in somewhat mainstream media of telltale stains. That's about all I can say, I think, on this in this medium. So there's stuff. That's one thing. Excuse me. Audio tapes are of Jeffrey Epstein talking about the White House, among other things, is also interesting. Of course, these all prior to Jeff Epstein's committing suicide and in custody, and a whole bunch of other things. This may be the October surprise. And the person who has these in his, or at least has the tapes, not the images, or maybe he has the images. This is all unclear, I think, at the moment. It'll be interesting to have the Congress sort of ask the FBI to, as long as they're willing to share Hunter Biden images, why not a few Donald Trump images as well? Considering the various states of undress. Anyway, that's all kind of interesting. Our October surprise may have actually come. I posited over at Daily Kos that, well, maybe there's going to be some AI-generated images that will be, of course, amusing. And of course, there is in the large language or large image model, images of Trump with Ivanka sitting clothed on his knee, etc. So, needless to say, there's stuff, and we leave it to deep fakes to do their operation. So that's probably what's going to happen this weekend. So everyone, be careful about what you clickbait on or circulate or amplify. So that's kind of what we were talking about just a while ago. The reality, of course, is that there is an election. There's lots of politicking, multiple state visitations, multiple details at lower levels. This year may not have what is called the red mirage, that is Republican early voting results being high. Apparently, early voting is about at 30 million right now, which is higher than usual, maybe the highest in history. And it apparently weighs on the side of women, at least at one level, and in some preliminary swing state polling, it appears to be, and this is, of course, exit polling, it appears as if Kamala Harris is ahead. Kamala Harris is ahead. So this is all very preliminary. We won't know anything, not even perhaps on election day, but I think, you want to be, if you're a Democrat, you sort of think, well, maybe there's going to be a landslide and then we won't have to worry about shenanigans, because shenanigans are possible as well. We'll see how deeply they unfold. There are ways in which they could become complicated. Let's just put it that way, complicated, but they're there is, and thanks to Mark Elias, an army of lawyers prepared to jump on this problem, and because it's going to be there, we will see, coup 2.0, coup attempt 2.0. I assert, simply because there are people who are working a little bit more autonomously or independently. We may have some extreme versions of that occur in various places. I'm not going to be predictive about it, but it just seems to me that if anyone were working on this, they have been working on this for a while, at a variety of levels. So we'll see this soon. Needless to say, it will be exciting. I think it's important that everyone just simply relax, because the election system is not foolproof, but it certainly is, as we discovered actually in 2020 or 2021. It's sustainable. It on the one hand, there are Trumpists who have become election officials, but I think that's not at a very large scale. On the one hand, on the other hand, everyone's keeping an eye on everyone else, which is what democracy is really about in terms of the political sphere. So I think we're going to have some hopefully self-governance in operation, that people actually think there's a constitution at all. Looks nice, Joe.
So, are you saying that there's resiliency built into the system? Oh,
Well, if you
relax. Are you kidding me?
if you read the 18th century stuff, yeah, perhaps.
Oh,
There's a theory of the public sphere that actually considers this its self-regulating activity, and it goes back a ways, that political communication is exactly that under democracy, self-regulating. A little idealistic, we could say, considering how many violations of it occur in quasi-democratic realms, that is, like so-called banana republics, where the same stuff has happened. We just haven't gotten to the things that occur in certain Latin American countries, where the military decides to seize the Supreme Court, stuff like that. That's just hasn't quite happened. But it's interesting just to see these matters at work, and certainly we've seen little elements of them sort of move around, and certainly sad things have occurred. People self-immolating in front of the Supreme Court is pretty interesting, and some people need to be reminded that yes, some people actually do that. So it will be difficult. I'm grateful that there weren't any incidents of major violence at the ellipse speech this past week by Kamala Harris. It was a good speech. It well written too. If you want to read the text of it, there's certain key elements. One, there's not this nice alliterative phrase that does the same thing that a Barack Obama does in repeated phrases. Quite good. I mean, it goes crescendo and then resolves itself. Quite well written. I mean, from a rhetorical point of view, it's quite well written and almost well delivered. I mean, it was good. It was very Kamala, but a nicely crafted speech, particularly when you see it on paper. It's one for the ages. And so it's been a tough week in terms of lots of people running around, lots of people. We started the week with crazy crap about McDonald's. We ended it sorta a couple days ago with garbage trucks, and incredibly the meme or trope, which was being sort of fronted, it's sort of unintentionally, but of course intentionally, because Trump people are inept. They put up a text that was telepromptered, on the issue of garbage. And Puerto Rico is garbage, which filled the weekend. It was a funny kind of thing where just to do it in New York particularly, also interesting, because then you have a kind of little sub-amplifying effect locally, and trashing Puerto Ricans, which is a Trump thing anyway, that does actually go back to his administration preventing aid to arrive at in Puerto Rico after the Hurricane Maria. And if you remember,
I think that's what they call edgy comedy.
yeah, yes, indeed. We all remember the image of him tossing paper towels to a crowd
Oh yeah.
in Puerto
Ironic.
Rico, holding up $20 billion of aid to Puerto Rico for no apparent reason at all, making it very, very difficult actually for repair efforts, recovery efforts. So that happened, and it was interesting from that point of view. That there was an acceleration, and then we suddenly realized how many Puerto Ricans actually are Americans, and somehow whoever the Trump strategists are, they're just not very smart, and to imagine that potentially this activity could make Florida go blue. That's a far out proposition, but an interesting possibility, not one that's highly possible, but it does show some interesting elements about how Americans are or think. I mean, they actually have made that mistake several times during the Trump administration, not just Trump administrators, but there are several members of Congress who don't believe that Puerto Rico is part of the United States and don't sort of understand that relationship of our territories at all. So that's kind of interesting. It's a big civics lesson. We had some reiteration about the Electoral Count Act since it got revised, and there are some elements that are corrections to the existing act, which goes back over a century. The issue, of course, is whether it's possible for Congress to seize control of the electoral count. And that's sort of fascinating, maybe not in terms of the count, but in a close race, it could off shift and throw the final decision about a president into the House of Representatives. And since there's a minor majority, very, very close one at the present moment, something, stuff could happen, hijinks, shenanigans, hanky-panky, all that stuff could really happen. And unless you think it's not happened before, there are precedents for it. And yes, as I've mentioned before, take a look at the election of 1876 and the Compromise of 1877, which ended Reconstruction. And ultimately, although it took maybe about 10 years, brought on Jim Crow and all of the issues that we've sort of had to put up with for literally a century. Stuff's been there. And you can see that there, a lot of things haven't still yet been fixed, but I think we can fix them. I think, from speaking democratically, stuff can be fixed. That's kind of the design of the system. However, in need of sort of renovation, I think is what needs to be done.
Sounds like a whole lot of malarkey, if you ask me.
Yes, lots of malarkey. There's been a week of continuing malarkey. Trump continues to express the fact that America should return to a quote unquote gilded age of the 1890s, where we had super high tariffs. He, of course, neglects to mention the multiple depression, panics, bank panics. The economy was really a mess for literally a decade. He don't want to talk about that. He wants to talk about high tariffs. And there are high tariffs. There are high tariffs. Tariffs exist. They exist now. Some of his tariffs still exist now. Tariff policy is there for a variety of reasons, because it's meant to control prices, and it serves sort of de facto as an industrial policy, which the United States sorely lacks. It's unfortunate that we need world war in order to gain an industrial policy. But in fact, that's kind of what we're doing. We do all kinds of small efforts to create industrial policy when, in fact, there's lots of trouble. I mean, there's just lots of trouble. It's in one case, you subsidize certain things, commodities, and on others, you ignore the fact that you need to have a position on the global position of some of our commodities, just speaking from a commodities point of view. And then there's all the other stuff. We have an industrial, military industrial complex that really hasn't changed since World War II. And, and we keep propping it up for a variety of reasons. And of course, we get little wars or the threats of wars, which is what this last week was about. We had tit for tat rather relative to Iran. Apparently, the Israelis decided that they would attack certain military facilities in Iran. Apparently, they didn't attack any nuclear facilities, but they got close, which was the kind of signaling behavior in terms of the attacks. Fairly precise. I think only a very small number of people were killed. So, precision done at night, early in the morning. All of those things that are part of good military messaging on the one hand. On the other hand, this is a kind of a lot of posturing, throwaway. If nothing else, it reminded us how there is a broad American presence in the Middle East, including about a quarter of Syria is actually controlled by the United States, which if you don't want to think about it, but it's kind of there. We control the sort of eastern quadrant of Syria. It's just rarely reported on, which I find also interesting. That's a whole nother story. And let's not go down the Israel-Gaza road, but that's a whole nother issue. I think there has been signaling that a Harris administration is going to be quite different than a Biden administration on the issue of the Middle East. So I think that's on the one hand dangerous. On the other hand, it's there. All the pieces are there. We have 2 aircraft carriers and a bunch of other stuff. So that's happening. So other news this week is, verges on the Ukrainians. I think the dominant image, even though it's really actually not that significant, is that there's about 3,000 Koreans at the front lines in and around Kursk in Russia, which is the part of the Kursk has been taken by the Ukrainians and is still a contending area. A lot of folks, the death and casualty rate is still very high. It is higher than it's ever been in an average, from an average point of view, in Ukraine, Russia. So that's kind of what's going on. No Koreans have been, Koreans were killed a couple of weeks ago because they were all clustered in one place and somebody dropped a bomb on them, probably very unintentionally. So Koreans are already dead, but the 3,000 of what has been an initial 10,000 troops that has been claimed to have been sent to Russia are there. Now, the issue, of course, is that they're in Russian uniforms and probably using Russian equipment. So there's a whole nother set of issues there that has to do with, are they going to get the top line equipment or equivalent because these are Koreans trained in North Korean tanks, which are very similar to the kind of older Russian tanks that are used. So there's some overlap there, but it is about a translation problem that North Koreans are not necessarily all Russian trained, in the sense of kind of read the manual. So there are going to be those issues. There have been some suggestions in the less mainstream press about accidents that will occur because of Russian command structure, Korean, and that how many fluent Russian speakers do you have in the officer corps of the North Korean army? I would assert a fair number, but are they the ones that actually got sent? That's a whole nother issue. The other claim was, well, we have 3 generals out there. Well, that 3 Korean generals, it may be that they're the 3 generals they want to get rid of. So that's a whole other thing. We'll see about military discipline in the coming days. The Ukrainians are still being provisioned. There's as I mentioned, I think last week, a French-supported brigade that uses mainly French equipment and probably uses French military doctrine, which should be quite interesting, seeing where they're going to be located. Newer stories have occurred. I printed up some or posted some stuff on that. The history of the Battle of Kiev is going to is available, and sort of interesting to see how that will be written, whether it's revisionist history or not. Joe,
Yes.
you're gonna
Oh,
cook that thing down, right?
yep. We're hoping it'll reduce before you're finished.
All righty. Looking forward to this.
But I have to, since they're not completely submerged, we also need to steam it a bit. We need to make sure that it's steamed enough so it's cooked thoroughly, but yet
Yes.
reduces enough so that it's a syrup.
That oil or water
Well,
or syrup.
that's half water, half sugar.
Alrighty. So,
So you can pace yourself. We got
all
time.
right. Alrighty. So war is still continuing. This week, I sort of discovered by accident that the European Union has a significant presence in Africa, much more significant than I thought before. So I posted a little bit on that just to remind myself, as among others, that is besides the Chinese, there's a significant European Union presence in Africa, not so different than under colonialism. So that's there. There's still the issue, although there's a few small sanctioning elements on the Russian shadow oil fleet. That's sort of going on. There have been no snafus in terms of surveillance, although this week the NATO decided they would post the map or a diagram that shows that at any one moment in time, there are 30 pieces of there are 30 aircraft in the air over the line dividing NATO and Russia. There are surveillance aircraft. There's all kinds of other things that are in the air, all up and down probably an 800-mile front, which is made longer.
That is Russian. Is that Russian and NATO forces, or just
Well,
NATO?
it's Russian versus NATO forces. In other words, the NATO force goes from the tip of Finland down through the Baltics, all the way down to the edge of Romania, I guess. It's a pretty long line, and so that's daily activity. There's a lot of air traffic up there, just surveilling stuff moving around. So lest you think people are just sitting on their hands, it's a 24/7 thing. And fortunately, there were very few accidents this week. The usual things got attacked, civilian buildings. A couple of people got killed by missile attacks on, I think, Kharkiv and on Kyiv, mainly on Kharkiv, which is fairly close to the border. That's a big problem. Although I would assume that a part of the front end of any major offensive will be to expand an area of control into Russia from there. It's just the second largest city. You got to, it's going to need space. So there's something's going to happen over there. Because when it happened before, certainly a lot of Russians got killed, and this is when they were sending, prisoners, and they're still collecting prisoners. Last week, I made the observation that they're scooping up all kinds of people. There's a minor article, which I found is disinformational, but that they were seizing civilian-held weapons. It's quite legal, more or less legal, or de facto legal, to have a fully automatic AK-47 in your house, although most people have, more standard firearms. But that Russians were that some members of the Russian, it's probably the Rosguardia or somebody, running around confiscating weapons, which is interesting considering their position on firearms. Civilian weapons, quote unquote, to be used in the war. That's just, malarkey, as they say, because undoubtedly they have warehouses full of AK-47s and SKSs and all kinds of funny stuff going back to World War II, sitting in warehouses somewhere. So if they haven't turned it into some kind of capital, moving small arms capital. So that's the other side of that activity. Most of the focus has been on this Korean thing that has been occurring, and it's been happening for a couple of weeks, so it's really not. It won't be a big deal until there's an actual confrontation, I think, between some sort of brigade level confrontation between a North Korean brigade and a Ukrainian brigade. This is something's going to happen. It's going to happen fairly soon. And we'll just see what happens, whether the stuff happens, they get driven, somebody gets driven back, territory gets created. The situation in Kursk is still rather fluid. Despite that initial sort of thrust into Russia, it's calmed down relatively, although there's some seepage to the northwest, which is kind of where the fighting has. I mean, they're still fighting all along the line in Kursk, but there's some seepage into the north, which is interesting for a whole bunch of other reasons. That's in the general direction of Chernobyl, et cetera. That, I mean, not that close, but that's the direction it's going to go in. So those things are there. There's other questions about, there's the continuing, drones and stuff. Ukrainian drones are getting into Russia, still bombing things here and there. Similarly, there's missiles and drones being shot at in the hundreds. So there's 1,100 glide bombs last week. That's the official announcement by the Ukrainians. Russian glide bombs sent all over Ukraine. So all kinds of stuff is still happening. Every day there is war. It just, we don't see a lot of it, and people don't pay attention to it. But it's somewhere. Casualties are somewhere in around 1,000 to 2,000 daily, every day, and it's not disinformation. There's 1 million people have been wounded or killed in this conflict on both sides. If you add up all the stuff that's going on. And so the periphery is going on in terms of addressing people who fled Ukraine to be not conscripted. There's going to be tough stuff in the Ukrainian culture after that, with people who return and who were of military conscription age returning to Ukraine after this war. And whether there's an end to this war, well, it's another year, they project. There is going to be some sort of significant offensive of one kind or another, namely because this past week there was announcements of increased tank destruction. I know construction, that I know that you don't care to hear the minutia of this, but the T-90 tank is they're cranking out a bunch of them. The Russians have always had tank manufacturing lines, and some that for archaic tanks. So during a certain period, they were making older tanks, I think simply to use up the material that they had floating around, parts, etc. But they have a ton in reserve, some of which aren't working, and they've been cannibalizing stuff. But they do have a brand new tank, which is, they have several new tanks. There's a T-14, which is a tank that has no people in the turret. But that's hasn't actually. Well, they say it's appeared on in the battlefield, but it hasn't been really confirmed. Whereas T-90s, which is the sort of main general future export battle tank, main battle tank, has been they've been making them since the beginning of this war. So there's. It's hard to say how many are being put out every month or every week, but there are more of them, even though the Ukrainians are doing a pretty good job of knocking them down. Although the majority of tanks that have been hit are T-72s and T-64s and a variety of, mid-range Cold War Soviet Union tanks are the ones that get hit. But not too many do get hit, because the battle is now being fought among armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles of one type or another. Some are better armored than others, and so some get knocked down or disabled. And so
where I have a question. Where do drones, what role do drones play in relationship to all of those armored vehicles?
Oh,
I,
yeah, drones are the
I,
preferred.
I thought the tanks would be less useful these days.
They are less useful. And I posted an image yesterday of a Ukrainian T-80, I think, or T-64 getting hit by a drone. Or no, it wasn't hit by a drone. It was a drone image, and they got hit by an anti-tank round, which looked like it could have done real damage, but apparently it didn't. It just got dealt with by the armor, by the sort of exploding armor that most modern battle tanks have. I mean, it was quite spectacular, but apparently the tank managed to run away, the Ukrainian tank. So, but in on Toto, yes, they're not deploying tanks unless they do some major offensive. Tanks sort of come in there as that kind of major force to sort of burst everything open. Mainly, drones are the preferred means by which, whether it's a first-person, sort of view a drone, which takes an anti-tank round, which has an anti-tank round attached to it, and so they just goes in kamikaze style and takes out the vehicle. So most infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers are being taken out on both sides. Some have less armor than others, which is why they're incredibly vulnerable. So if a direct hit is scored, terrible things happen. But for the most part, that's a lot of that interaction is from drone activity. Both sides, although I would say that the Ukrainians are better at it. The Russians still have a bunch of other things going on, and both sides are using jamming technology. So jamming technology has taken a little bit of a forward role. For example, as an aside, about 10 to 20% of all drone attacks by Russians on Ukraine have been diverted in interesting ways. That is, they deflect drones coming in with some kind of jamming technology, which essentially takes control or diverts an incoming drone and sends it in other weird places like Poland or Belarus or Romania. So we've had these reports of drones going off course into other places that aren't involved in the war. And then, of course, a very few, which is even more amusing, the Ukrainian, however their jamming works, manages to send the damn drone back to where it came from, which is quite amusing, or could be quite amusing. That is, it returns on the path it came in on, which, if they can get that perfected, would be quite amusing. So, needless to say, both sides are using countermeasures of one kind or another in electronic warfare, and that is happening at the vehicle level. There are electronic warfare jamming that does go on. It does deflect some of the attacks, so that's interesting. And then, of course, you have the ubiquitous so-called cope cages. That is where you place a series of cage-like armored screen around every armored vehicle, usually around the turrets, which are vulnerable at the sort of intersection of the turret and the vehicle. And so that's happened. We've had fewer of the incidents of these huge barn-like enclosures put on top of tanks in order to advance, probably partially because it makes them incredibly vulnerable. So if you can actually get a drone in there, it literally makes the explosion worse. On the one hand, it can deflect a slightly, sort of off-course drone, but on the other hand, if you get it in through the front or the back, well, usually the front, that's where the gun is, all heck breaks loose. So that's kind of what's going on there. Sorry to indulge in that degree of detail, but in fact, with anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 people getting hurt or killed every day, stuff's happening. Yes, of course, I didn't talk about all of the issues in Israel and Gaza. Literally every day, the same activities occurring. what are ostensibly civilian facilities are getting hit by Israeli munitions, and it's sad. Um, the deaths are lower, thank God, but this happens every day. And aside from the sort of recriminations and policy issues, and of course we're distracted by our own war, so our own election as well as our own involvement in other wars. So that's happening as well. I mean, we could go at not at great detail, but Africa still has a couple of small wars going on at the same time. America is not involved in these, even though there are, American troops and other stuff, but there also are Chinese peacekeepers, among others, in Africa on that basis. And we're just lucky we don't have other crazy things going on at the same moment. So yes, that's kind of our week in war. Let's return back to the current election. The election is had all kinds of other sub stories, right? Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, admitted or revealed, because he's not very bright, that one of the bigger attempts by the Republicans will be to eradicate, eliminate, delete, as they've tried to do 50 or 60 times before in terms of legislation, the ACA, aka Obamacare, which 10 plus million people are on health care. And why do they want to do that? Because of cruelty. Well, but also because of profit. Because if you displace all those people, they're going to have to figure out ways of going into debt further and to cover their medical care. And the several oligopolistic, as it were, medical corporations will gain greater profits in the long run for that. And layered against that, of course, is the pharmaceutical industry. So you can, it's pretty much the good guys and the bad guys are pretty clear in this election. And, so if you're not directly involved, that is, you have a job with a medical plan for your family, et cetera, you're less concerned about these matters. But on the other edge of that is, the fact that the side that supports that really wants to make it more costly overall for people in the short run, but also gain profit in the short run over that type of medical care. Whereas on the other side, moving towards universal health care is still damn possible. Medicare for all was actually extended in the plans by Kamala to apply in terms of Medicare. There's a slight Medicare expansion in terms of expanding it into elder care. So while that does have a leakage problem relative to financing and profit and all kinds of other things that need regulatory attention, it's fairly clear that that's a slight Medicare expansion along an area that is not too hard to expand, partially because it overlaps with Medicaid, et cetera. And so those moves are actually, stuff's going to happen. All the better reason to vote for the good guys rather than the people who simply are about profit. It is about profit. So there's no other reason for it. I mean, they can't promise better medical care. Well, yes, they can promise better medical care if you pay for it, which is really the bottom line. It's just what it is.
Or cruelty could be the point as well.
Sorry, a little garbled.
Cruelty? Oh, sorry.
Oh, he does. Well, cruelty is a commodity in the current, genre. It's about cruelty. But let's divert over into garbage. Garbage this week. I didn't finish my story about the garbage. The comic at the Madison Square Garden event, which of course drew all of the Godwin analogies to the Nazi rallies of 1938. And needless to say, while there weren't Nazis explicitly, there certainly was racism among other things. And so this one comedian, whose name I will not repeat, simply because he's, not a very smart guy, but and doesn't need the publicity, but talked about and he'd workshop this routine. So this is like prepared thing. It's not off the cuff. That Puerto Rico was a garbage island, essentially. That was the message. pissing off everyone up to and including Geraldo Rivera, which, that's kind of interesting just for a historical anecdote. But so what the Trumpists decided to do was message it as a gaffe by President Biden, who it wasn't a horrible gaffe, and it really was about an apostrophe ultimately, which is a stupid detail. But the Trumpists tried to message it that Biden thought all members of the GOP or Trumpists were garbage. And well, they may be garbage, but I think that was clearly, from a context analysis point of view, not what Biden meant. But they still ran with it. So you had Trumpists attending Trump rallies and events, including Laura Trump, dressing in garbage bags, which I find quite amusing, just simply because, it's more like de facto guerrilla raincoats, whatever. But,
So punk
dress.
rock.
Oh, yeah,
It's
absolutely.
the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's good for a chuckle, but pretty much, but some dudes decided that they would screen print, MAGA garbage on top of the garbage bag, just in case you didn't get the damn message. So we have pictures of some of these idiots running around in garbage bags, all quite amusing, but not enough of them. But needless to say, the event spurred a Trump sort of doubling down on it, like it usually does, because Trumpists aren't that smart, and addressed in a huge, it was like triple XL or quadruple XL. I think there is a quintuple XL sized orange safety vest, and jumping aboard into the passenger seat of a Trump labeled garbage truck, the kind of compressed garbage that wander around your neighborhood. And they thought they were being quite clever, that Trump, oh, poor us. Biden called all of us garbage. And so therefore Trump, in his bright, huge orange vest, does a photo op in Wisconsin of getting aboard a truck that they had tricked out and dragged up from Chicago. It's a white one, all white, so that and put a huge, Trump Vance or whatever sign on the side of the damn thing, as though, I suppose the meme was that Republicans were in the garbage truck or something. Very, it bad messaging at best. The thing was that Trump guy tried to get into the cab, right? It's an elevated cab with several steps. He it took him 3 times to grab the latch on the door. And he's used to having other people open his damn doors for him. So that's one thing. And then he misses the step, stumbles, almost falls over, and then finally lifts himself. It reached almost the point where the guy behind him was almost going to push him into the seat. And so he gets there and makes a few yammering remarks about how he's, sort of didn't know what was going on with the comic and the garbage reference and blah, blah, blah. And then they do a couple of quick circuits around the airfield with this was on a tarmac, with the garbage truck, and that was that. And of course it had American flags on it, blah, 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 blah. Now, whether that, sort of moving or mobile signifier actually did what it was supposed to do is unclear, and the garbage bags don't really help. So that garbage thing lasted for a couple of days until Kamala's speech on the ellipse. So fortunately, the garbage thing, I think, has ran out in terms of its usefulness, mainly because it certainly wasn't positioned properly in terms of a counter message. So in other words, the front message about insulting Puerto Ricans rather than displacing the target to Republicans just didn't work. It was just amusing to see, and this is worth a case study, if nothing else, to see whether you could shift the message, sort of message unit, as it were, from one thing to another. And I mean, we know Republicans are garbage, but you could just say that, and you can't counter the fact that during the past couple of weeks, Trump promoted a message calling America a large garbage can, a massive garbage can. So it just, this message was not going to work, considering that, it was a standard piece of the rally speech to talk about America as a large garbage can. And therefore making Republicans or the GOP or Trumpists garbage. It's just, it's like set theory, it's sort of stupid. It's like a bad Venn diagram. Anyway, that was this week. What's coming is an election on Tuesday. And people say that, it appears as if people are, there's a lot of early voting and a lot of people are going to vote on election day, which I will do. I simply don't want to have a small fight over stuff that I'm not in the right voting district or the whatever. They didn't notify me of that the last couple of elections ago, but I'm going to go to my standard polling place, talk to the same people who volunteer and who operate the site, and they know me at least by my clothing now, even though I'm masked when I vaccine masked when I go in. Anyway, so that's going to happen for me on Tuesday. Even though I could probably go in on Saturday or Sunday. Your state may have early voting capability. They didn't widely advertise that in my state, so but it's there. At least my little town, is doing that, which is very nice and walking distance for me, so it's not a big deal. So anyway, that's the kind of election stuff. That squash is cooking down well there, Joe.
Yep, we're just turned off the stove, so looks pretty good. We kept the rind on the squash so that it maintains its form, doesn't disintegrate, and it should be edible by now, if you choose.
Are you going to have a sauce that's going to go with it?
Yeah, so we've got the syrup that goes with it, but then I'm going to plate it up right now.
Okie dokie. Twilight Zone is tonight. I don't know if John's here. There is a there's an episode that involves television tonight. John? And hoping that John is here to preview this. Tonight's episode includes a unpleasant man gets his TV repaired by an unusual repairman. The episode is called "What's in the Box." It really is a quite good episode, and you'll see that at the bottom of the hour. After that, we'll have open dialogue at about 10:30. The watch along tonight that was brought to us by Hench 21 is The Penguin, which, as I've said before, it's about Gotham City and it's the DC Comics character universe, and it has Colin Farrell in the most amazing fat suit. So that alone is worth it's just interesting how he, to quote the first big Batman movie, not the one with the more comic one. It is about it's about the suit. Anyway, that's that. So that's on today's menu. You were going to say something, Joe?
Oh no, I just almost lost one. They're a little slippery, these suckers.
All righty. Yum. They're not too sweet, are they? I mean, in terms of the sugar sort of deal going on?
Well, the sugar will be pretty sweet, but whenever you see these recipes, you can basically cut the sugar in half.
Yeah, there we go. Interesting. Nice. Yum. Yum, yum, yum. On the weekends, there will be weekly marks among other matters. I can't recall what the movie. We have another political movie coming up, right?
We have two. One on Saturday. You have to refer to the schedule. Saturday, an Andy Griffith film.
Excellent.
It's escaping me now. If Susanna's in the room, maybe she could speak up and mention it.
We have
There
the
we go.
1957 A Face in the Crowd, 60 years ahead of its time. Television
Excellent.
creating a charismatic demagogue.
Excellent.
Sunday, we at 5 p.m. we'll be honoring Terry Garr with one of her rare and finest performances opposite Ellen Burstyn, Pack of Lies.
Oh yes, yes, yes. These are excellent flicks. If you haven't ever seen them, worth a watch. So that's kind of what the weekend has for us in store, aside from my normal yammering about weekly marks. Among other matters, we have usually music later in the evening, and a variety of sorts. I don't know if Lane wants to talk about music on Sunday. Lane? Lane is probably doing other things, not necessarily his ablutions. So,
Hope everything comes out all right.
yes.
I'm sorry, Prof. Ann, did you
Oh,
call
yes.
on me?
Well, I don't call on anyone. But we're going to have a television-related Twilight Zone tonight, aren't we?
We are. Yes, the Twilight Zone is back after a 1 week hiatus due to toxic fumes. Tonight's episode is called What's in the Box? And it stars Joan Blondell, who is going toe-to-toe with William Demarest.
Ooh.
And we have Sterling Holloway throwing some pixie dust in the background.
Indeed. William Demarest, as I recall from my terrible memory, My Three Sons, wasn't the William Demarest in My Three Sons?
Yes, he was. That's where I knew him from. Yeah, but he had quite a acting career, actually.
Oh yes, indeed.
Yeah, not as big as Joan Blondell's, though.
Oh, also. Nice meal, Joe. Yum. Nice dessert.
Yeah, here we have kabak tatlısı in Turkish and kalabasa and tacho in Espanol with almost similar ingredients. In Turkey, they add either clotted cream or fresh ground tahina.
Yum. Yum, 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 yum.
And it's also got ground walnuts, but a big fan of the pistachios. Some pistachios there.
Mm. Nice.
And the main ingredients was half sugar, half water. If you can, use the raw sugar cane. Canel. Oh, losing my English. Not gaining enough Turkish and have my Norwegian intact there. Canel is these long sticks there are called cinnamon. There we go. Got it. Cinnamon sticks, clove, and some orange rind. That's the component there. And you can use any kind of winter squash, pumpkin, pie pumpkin. And you just braise it in the syrup until it reduces till it's thick enough and that the skin is tender. Pretty simple.
Yum. Yum.
All natural, even the sugar cane. Although ours is a little refined. Don't shoot me, James, please.
Hmm. Well, we're getting to the end now. Let's all
This is a traditional Day of the Dead dessert.
yes, and at least to bracket this, we've done this in memory of our friend Cameron. All peace to you, brother. We'll try to do better next week.
Wow.